Alright, so today I'm going to show you how to add color to your actual subject matter. So last time we talked about going on your background with multiple layers so that you can get a nice bold background, okay? So my background, you can see my picture is slightly green. I made it a little bit more bolder just because I wanted a lot of emphasis on this flower. I wanted the flower to stand out. So what I'm going to recommend is that when you are looking to paint your subject matter, whatever it is, maybe start with a very light wash. So for watercolor, washes are kind of a light covering over everything. It just adds tone or adds color to the surface, because sometimes leaving things pure white can be daunting, which means like it makes us feel like anything we do is going to make it so drastically different, and it kind of attributes to what makes us feel nervous when we paint or do art in general. So I have my palette paper right here that I'm going to use to mix some colors on, and I'm going to add water to my palette paper. Oops, I should clean up my brush a little bit better. Keep paper towel handy, good to remember for when we paint. Keep your paint water nearby, keep paper towel, all that good stuff nearby. So I've got clean water. I'm going to go on with some red, and I'm going to really wash it out with a lot of water. I also have a spray bottle that I like to use. So okay, so in my picture it's kind of this fuchsia-y purple color. I'm really just focusing on a light wash, so I'm going all over my painting with this very, very light wash just to add some tone, okay? Just notice that my background is completely dry, so when I get next to that green with this wash, it's not mixing together whatsoever, okay? I'm trying not to have big areas be like much darker than the rest. I'm trying to just overall give it a tone, an even wash across my surface. You can see in my photo that my flowers are kind of darker towards the center of the petal, and as they get towards the end of the petal, it gets lighter, more of a white, lightish pink color. So I recognize that, I understand that, but I'm going over with the wash so that I can add an overall color. So eventually, if when I add more watercolor paints, there won't be really any area that's just the color of my paper white. I want to add tone to everything. This part doesn't usually take too long. And you'll notice that if your paper isn't taped down at all, it'll start to curl a little bit. That's just what happens to watercolor paint as we add water to it. And to get washes, we have to make the paint color washed out with water. So sometimes there's a lot of water content on our papers that'll kind of make it bend, which is okay. We can always flatten it out later when we're done with our project. We can put something heavy on it to flatten it out. Just know that while your paper is wet like this, don't pick it up. If you pick up your painting, it will drip, and it could drip into the background. So if you have a lighter background than I do, you'll really notice that. If I had light blue background and I started to drip onto it, that would bother me. So keep your paper flat as best as you can. Of course, it's going to curl, okay? So before I do anything else, before I go in with any details, I am going to let it dry. And it needs to dry for a little bit. If I were to go into it right now with some details to add where the darker areas are in my painting, then I would actually be doing that wet into wet effect where it starts to blend together. There's a couple different ways you can speed up the painting process, though. You can use a hair dryer, you could kind of fan at it with your hands, or another sheet of paper. Just know that you do want to take your time and wait for things, because if you don't, it's just not going to end up the best. Okay. So I'm going back and looking at my painting, and I'm going to start to mix up the color that I want for the center parts where it gets pretty dark. So I'm going to actually grab some purple. I have a clean paint brush here. I'm going to add some water to that since that is purely mostly just the paint. There we go. I'm actually going to mix into this red here. It's a little too purple still. It's more of like a fuchsia or like a red-violet color. So I'm going to keep mixing. It's starting to get there. I need a little bit more red. Cleaning off my brush so I don't mix any colors into the paint. And that's pretty close. So what I'm going to do, as it dries down, I'm going to start just in the centers of the petals and work my way out and lightening them up. I think I need just a tad bit more red. And you can see I'm mixing a lot of color because I do have a big flower. This is a 10 by 10 inch paper, so I want to be sure that I have enough color to kind of last me. I can see in some parts that it's still damp because it's shiny. Otherwise, it's mostly dry. All right, and it's only been maybe 2-3 minutes since I last painted. It's a little damp, but it's not going to ruin things. So I'm going to work. I'm going to kind of zoom in on my picture. Since I have it on my phone, I can do that. You can do that on your laptops too. I'm going to work kind of in these petals first. So I'm going in and I'm just getting the big areas of color. I'm not really worried about too many details yet. I can go in with a detailed brush, which is like a smaller brush, later on. Kind of add some detail. Might zoom in a little bit closer so you guys can see. And remember, whatever you leave, it's going to dry like that. So I might just go and clean off my brush, tap it off, dry it off a little bit, and then go and spread this out a little bit higher up. I also noticed that the area around some of these petals are super dark, so I'm not going to put that in until this dries. Remember, if you don't want that wet into wet effect, you have to wait for things to dry. So I'm just starting with my shadows. It's just like our still life project. Focus on the dark areas first and then work your way up. And I'm kind of focusing on just this ring. Okay, I'm not going too, over to the side and out. I might do this one right now because it's just kind of close. All right, I'm cleaning off my brush and I'm spreading out that pigment. So we're all painting something different. If you're not painting a flower, this doesn't entirely apply to you, right? So you're going to go with a different method. If you're doing, a succulent or a leaf, maybe this is very similar for you. If you're doing a rock or a crystal or, something very different, it's just not the exact same strategy as you might use. So just keep in mind that you do want to start with your shadows first. Wherever you see your shadows, work there. Be patient, let things dry. You may have noticed how I kind of went in and I picked up a little bit of paint and I dropped it, boop, at the bottom. I'm doing that so it gets that effect of dark to light. And I'm going to just keep on going with this until I get the majority of the petals painted in. I'm leaving this white space around it for the shadow areas that I'm going to focus on most likely in the next video where I add more details. I'm going to be careful not to lift my paper. If I lift my paper, we know that the watercolor is just going to spread. Okay? And keep in mind too, just like the background, we are going to want to go in and layer things up. So just because you painted it once doesn't mean you're done. You do want to work at thinking about layering in watercolors and how when we layer, it adds more depth, gives us more details, and just more things to work with in general. Okay, so you should be working on either finishing up the background and moving on to your subject, or just focusing on your subject, whatever you may have finished first. Keep an eye on our daily folders. This project is our last project, the last thing to be graded for the quarter, and you don't want to get behind when you're at home. So go in with your details, let things dry. If you feel like you're not sure what to do, just revisit it in a couple of minutes. Let it dry down a bit, and then it'll probably make it a little bit clearer for you. Okay? So keep working with watercolor. Things are work in progress. Sometimes we get to what I call like an ugly stage where things just don't look that good. Like right now I'm like, this isn't the greatest. I've definitely painted, better than this before, but it's not really about that. It's about the process and taking the right steps in order to get a good end result. Okay, so focusing on shadows, popping in dark areas when you need to go back into them with that, mixing colors. Don't go straight from the paint palette to your paper. You want to mix things up. You can even mix right on the surface. Like if I feel like I need a little bit more red, I can grab some red on my paintbrush and drop it in. And drop it into certain areas. While it's wet, it'll give that kind of nice faded effect. My paper's bending because I'm working with it, so I might slightly tilt it a little bit. I said not to, but I can use this to my benefit if I need things to spread out a little bit better. All right, just be careful of drips in general. Again, it's a work in progress. It's not the best thing I've ever done just yet. I feel like I need a lot more shadows going on in here, especially around these petals. I'm going to have to go in with a lot more darks, and that'll help me fill in some of the blanks that I have. Okay, so keep painting, work from background to foreground. Start with your shadows once you're on your object, and things will start to fall in place.